MacVoices is supported by LinkedIn Jobs. Find the right person for your business today with LinkedIn Jobs. Pay what you want and get $50 off your first job post at linkedin.com/MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by Zapier. Connect your apps and automate your workflows. For a 14-day free trial before the end of this month, visit zapier.com/MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Linode, your solution when you need a virtual server in the cloud. Use the code MacVoices to take $20 off your first purchase at linode.com/MacVoices. Welcome back to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's been a long time since I got him because he's done a bunch of book updates and I can never catch him. But this time, Glenn Fleishman has a brand new Take Control book, I should say, and I've got him here to talk about it. Glenn, it's great to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, and thank you for being such a persistent and excellent person and getting me on the show. So I'm eager to come back when I have. And it's what you said is true. Is it's updates. When Apple doesn't change something for a year, I'm still updating the book. But I'm like, well, this button is a little bit bigger than it was last year. Not as interesting to talk about as an entirely new book.
Well, and this book is one that I'm anxious to hear what you have to say about the subject. And of course, we can't cover the whole book. But this is Take Control of Home Security Cameras, which, it seems like some version of home security camera by some manufacturer is in the news every other day about data breaches and security and concerns and who's doing what with the images and the audio they capture. And so the fact that you took this topic on, it's so timely and so great that, I want to hear all about it.
It's funny because I started working on the book. I think I pitched it to Joe in November or December. So some of the Ring stuff had happened, but then I think we've had 3 or 4 major things happen since I started writing. So, the timing is good. And I also want to give all credit to my wife, Lynn, as I said, what's the next book I should write? And we call her the early rejecter in my household. She's not a fan of cutting edge technology. She doesn't want smart speakers in the house, which I don't either particularly. We do use Siri, but we don't have an Echo or a Google Assistant or Home or any of those things. And so she's a great bellwether of like, what does a reasonable person who knows how to use computers really well, carries a smartphone all the time, what do they think? And she said, cameras, because I don't know enough to know about how much they're invading my privacy and how secure they are. So you should write a book about that. I said, great. I pitched it to Joe. He said, great. And we thought it fit. And the same thing is I've been using web cameras and other kinds of internet connected cameras for decades. I mean, you and I are old enough. We remember the famous coffee cam at, was it Cambridge University, I think, the computer science. We were on the first internet webcam, since shut down, sadly. But, I've used various generations. And then we bought, before we went on a family trip about 1.5 years ago, we had just had a spate of burglaries in the neighborhood. And I had been resisting, as had our early rejector. Like, I don't really want a camera in the house. Am I being whatever? And then I was like, I don't want to be gone for 2 weeks. We didn't have a house sitter. We had people checking on the house. I'm going to get one. We're going to put it in place. Because then if something goes wrong, at least, we have some footage of what happened. The best thing that happened while we were gone is a truly enormous raccoon, the largest raccoon I've ever seen in the neighborhood. In the middle of the day, we're in London, and I get an alert on my phone, and this huge raccoon, it was, this wide. I've never seen one this big. Just walked up our front walkway. We're in a neighborhood. We're not in the country. Walked to the back of the house, but an hour later, walked back out, just like 5 in the afternoon on a summer day. So that's the kind of thing you can expect. If you're lucky, you're going to watch wildlife and not people stealing things off your porch. But it felt like there's so much going on, and people are so, I've written all these books that involve security and privacy. And I thought, what's the most intimate thing you have is like people, a thing that is videotaping and recording audio of you in your home or looking out of your home, watching all your comings and goings, those of your neighbors and those of unwanted visitors and trespassers. So it felt like a natural extension of my interest in helping people understand what they have at stake and how to protect it, even while they use a technology that may be not new, but it's now becoming commonplace. So that was the motivation for the book, at least.
I guess I do want to touch on the history of it because you're right. Those early webcams, I mean, there were some really interesting experiments, and they were fun things. You could look at London or look at Paris
Oh yeah,
on
it
a
was
on a
fun.
fixed webcam, and and like you say, the coffee maker, and different crazy stupid things, and I think somebody had one in a refrigerator somewhere.
That's
And
right.
this was back when the privacy aspect was just not on anybody's radar. I mean,
Hmm.
it was kind of obvious. If you don't want it to be on the webcam, then don't point the webcam in that direction.
Hmm.
And now you're right. We've invited them into our homes. Sometimes some of the companies behind the service and the camera, they've been called into question. Let's say I'll try to make it politely because I don't want to slander anybody here, or condemn anybody. But there are things that you need to think about when
Hmm.
you're buying and using these. So I guess, where do you start with something that seems like such a simple topic and yet can get so complex so quickly?
Well, I think this was kind of the crux of the book. Is I thought when I was outlining it, I thought I can't, the book can't be here's how you put a camera inside, pointing into your house or pointing out of your house, and you stream it to somebody else's cloud that you have no control over. Proprietary services cloud like Amazon Ring or Google Nest or independent companies, Logitech or Wise or whomever. The book can't take that as the sole focus because so many people don't want that, or they don't want the trade-offs. So I thought, what's the trade-off? The crux of the book is how much can you control how your video could be accessed, and how much can you not. So you can get a system. Some of them are standalone cameras. Like you can get almost like an old style webcam that's more sophisticated. It's designed. I mean, there's been this big. I guess there's actually this big divide. I didn't quite know how big the gap was. It's the older webcams were designed typically to capture a little bit of area. They didn't have a big angle of view. The quality was relatively low. They didn't have night vision, for instance. They were only intended to be used when you had some light. The light sensitivity was poor, and they typically connected to a computer, right? So the next generation is things that stand on their own, and then you have things like baby cams where you need a night vision because you can't see the baby at night if you don't have night vision unless you've got lights on in the room, and so forth. So the modern generation of cameras, there's kind of two sorts. There's ones that you plug in and they connect to the internet or to a hub on your local network, and they're kind of self-standing almost. They're kind of their own thing, and they might be wired or wireless or whatever. Then there's the kind that are multi-camera systems where the cameras are all wired to go back to a central video recorder, basically a network video recorder, and that's where the video lives. So, and then there's further divisions too. So you can kind of slice and dice. So you might say, well, I trust Google. Let's say, I know that statement isn't said that often. I trust Google with my video. I think they're doing a good job on like I don't agree with their advertising policies, say, one might say, but I think they're actually good at security, and I think they fight for my privacy, which could be said. Google has been involved in defying government subpoenas and suing and so forth. So you say, okay, that's cool. I'm going to get Google Nests, and Google has this new service plan. They've just changed the monthly plan, so it's going to be very inexpensive to have a bunch of Nest cameras, and that's how I'm going to go. And all my video is going to be stored online. None of it's going to be stored locally. And then if all my cameras were stolen or whatever, or my house burns down, I still have all the footage. I have the footage of somebody running up the stairs with a gas can and throwing a match because it wasn't in the house. But you also might say, I don't trust any of these online companies, even small ones. And what I want is a camera that records all video locally. And I want it to record it to a secure, like a micro SD card that's in the camera. And that's the only place it goes. And the video never leaves my network. Or, and this is the funny part, there are these multi-camera systems, as I was saying, that are very inexpensive. You can get, 6 or 12 cameras for several $100s if you want. And a multi-terabyte hard drive on this central device, and you can have 12 cameras in your house pointing in and out, streaming video 24 hours a day to this box, and it's only on your local network. It never leaves your house, and you could disable remote access, so no one except you would ever have access to it. So that's the kind of split, I think, is people who are willing to trust a third party. That's whether they trust the third party from a privacy standpoint, like I know they're not going to violate my privacy, they're not going to let their employees look at stuff, or they trust that the company has good security, they're not going to allow hackers in because they've had a good history of preventing exploits. And so you look at Amazon Ring and you say, well, their history is not very good right now, but they're making a lot of changes. So they're gradually moving to a more secure stance to preserve our privacy. But if you don't trust those folks, you can get home video cameras, home security cameras that record locally in one of a couple different ways and never have the video leave your home network. And that is what some people want. So it's kind of a long answer, but I wanted to make sure both those bases were covered, because doing just one, not everybody wants to keep the video locally, and there's trade-offs with that, like your house burns down or someone steals the network video recorder with all the video on it from the last 2 months. And there's downsides with privacy, security, cost, and bandwidth for cloud storage. But I think what I try to do is set out all the differences and trade-offs and how you can mitigate them, and then make a choice on which side of the fence you want to be. And some people actually want a little of both. They want to record locally some video, but they're also willing to push some stuff to the cloud temporarily.
I have to admit, I had not really thought about it in exactly that way. I knew everything you just said, but I guess I've sort of rejected at least a small subset of those uses because they really don't apply to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I'm sure everybody else does the very same thing. I don't know that I see a real big point in having the security cameras if they don't notify me wherever I am.
Right. Right.
And maybe that's because, I may not be home all day. Now, today at the office, I got a notification from my camera that the camera thought it saw motion. What it really saw was, the sun coming in and out of the clouds fast. But, that's fine. I'm much happier than seeing somebody in my home. But that for me is the primary use case that, I get notified should there be an issue of some kind.
Yeah, and there are ways to set up. You can record video that's locally only on your network, but you can set some of those devices to say email you. The tricky part is like if you get into notifications, right? Because once you get notifications, that means you have to have an app. You can't do it through the web typically. But some of the devices actually can be configured to send email directly or through an email server that you can connect it to your email account. Even with two-factor authentication, and your individual device will email you and sometimes attach a screen capture, a small clip. So it's not going through third-party cloud service. It's going through something you control still. Some of the companies that make local-only recording do have apps, and you can optionally turn certain features on. So you can say, I want to be able to stream or access it remotely. And then, again, you're not exactly going through them. You have to trust that their app is not stealing your credentials, basically. So there is a level of trust, but the data is never being sent through their servers. They're basically connecting you back to your network, but you have to use their app for that and for notifications. So all these little gradations. And I guess it was funny. I wrote the first chapter of this book 3 times. I wrote the first chapter, then I realized I left something out. So I pushed it back, wrote another first chapter. Then I did that again. And what I wound up being the first chapter in the end, the real first chapter was, why do you want a camera anyway? Like, what's the purpose? Because I realized I'd muddled it in my head is a lot of people want it for crime. They're in a high crime area, or they're in my neighborhood Seattle is a very safe city. And I looked at crime stats worldwide. I was just curious because there is this perception the world has become more dangerous and more violent. And there's more burglary and whatever. In fact, in most places, most developed countries, so Europe and parts of Asia, United States, Canada, the burglary rate is down by half or more. In the Netherlands, it's down by 3/4 in the last decade of recorded information. And you're like, oh yeah, we have a heightened awareness because everyone's recording things now. So it's this weird thing. We're getting cameras because we think there's more burglary, because people are posting more videos about burglary, even though there's less burglary on average. But it's like all statistics, I think, and like all personal experiences. It doesn't matter what the statistic is if you live in a high crime area, right? So if you're in a neighborhood, as I am, where stuff is stolen off, Nextdoor is a great service for knowing how bigoted your neighbors are sometimes, sadly. But also it's great there's some great people on it in my neighborhood. It's very nice. And if you're on Nextdoor, what we find out is every day there's a package being stolen off, or someone's broke into someone's house while they're away. And we don't have a lot of crime, but we have enough that you're like, all right, if we aren't careful, we're going to get a delivery of something expensive to the front. A printer's going to show up or something. Not like printers that expensive. Excuse me, and it's going to get stolen. So even if your crime rate has gone down, which it has in most places, in most cities, your personal crime rate, your home crime rate may not. But that's just one thing. And I realize in splitting this up, I had focused and thought about it from a crime standpoint so much, and I realized the other part is some of us just want to know what's going on around our house. We want to know, when our kids arrive or leave. Like, we don't have latchkey kids, because I was a latchkey kid when that term meant something, and back in the day, it was like, "What? You're going home and there's no mother in the house?" In the retrograde 1970s, and but now it's a very typical thing. The kids let themselves in. The parents can track where their children are and whatever, and there's maybe too much tracking, but also more awareness. Anyway, so if I want to know when my kids come home, a camera is useful for that. If I want to know when a package is dropped off because I'm expecting something, if I want to let someone in my house, I've got a smart lock, or I can give them the key combination that I could change later, and I could see them. I can see them at the door and say, "Oh, great, here's the code. You can get in and do that thing. You can wash the floors or put in that new cabinetry I need." These are all, or you just like wildlife. I want to go see all the raccoons that walk up and down my front stairs while I'm not around. I want to see the birds out front. So I try to split it up. We may have overlapping needs, but I think for some people, there's almost no consideration of crime. It's just they kind of want a more general awareness of what's happening, often, let's say, for positive reasons. They want to know something happened, like someone arrived at their house and fixed the front lawn or mowed the lawn or whatever, not that something bad happened.
Yeah. This edition of MacVoices is supported by LinkedIn Jobs. Finding good people for your business is harder than ever, and that's why you should use LinkedIn Jobs to fill that difficult-to-fill position. LinkedIn Jobs not only gets you the candidates with the right technical skills, but also with the right soft skills, so that they match your requirements perfectly. LinkedIn is the world's largest professional network. Isn't that where you want to be looking for your next hire? Of course it is. With LinkedIn Jobs, you don't waste time interviewing people who aren't qualified or aren't what you're looking for. That's why, somewhere, a person is hired every 8 seconds with LinkedIn Jobs. Find out more about how LinkedIn Jobs can help you with your next hire at linkedin.com/MacVoices. Pay what you want and save $50 off your first job post. That's linkedin.com/MacVoices to save $50 off your first job post. Thanks to LinkedIn Jobs for their support of MacVoices. I desperately want to ask you the obvious questions, and I'm going to save those.
Oh,
so
shoot.
before we get to
ask me the hard questions first, right?
Well, maybe I'm going to start maybe in reverse, because the obvious questions are what do you buy, what do you recommend, and what don't you recommend. But before you do that, is there anything we can do regardless of what choices we have? Because a lot of us have already made choices, and we have these cameras in our home. Is there anything we can do to make them more secure, regardless of what brand or what options we're talking about? So that we've made the choice, we want to protect ourselves as much as we can.
Yeah, I think there's two categories of things I think you can do, and I think the Ring debacles have proven that. And remember, the Ring. I'll just briefly summarize the Amazon Ring situation. Is not that Amazon did not have a database breach. There's this increasingly common problem. You've probably had Joe on to talk about this in regards to passwords, right? Is that because there have been so many, if you go to Have I Been Pwned, which is one of my favorite sites, the guy who runs it's lovely Australian guy who I interviewed a couple of years ago, really neat guy. And it's a site that's basically a way for you to be notified if your email address shows up in a password breach. And he's also collected passwords that have been revealed in the clear in some database breaches. They're much less frequent. But, if you had some unique password you created that was actually unguessable, but a site disclosed that, that's a password that crackers will now try to break your account with it. They may not know it connects to you, or they may. So we know there's billions of password record leaks, and many of those have encrypted passwords, but many do not now, or some of the passwords have been cracked. So Ring's problem seems to be password reuse, is that people, let's say they had an old, iCloud password that someone cracked, and it's in a database somewhere, and people just try those against Ring, and Ring didn't have proper restrictions in place to prevent people trying bad passwords or trying a bad password or something. So the problem was password reuse. Is a password you might have used 5 years ago, you're still using it, or you used it at Ring, someone just logged in with it. And so it's not that they made a mistake. So Ring has now added two-factor authentication, which, as you know, I'm a big fan of. It means the password isn't enough. You also have to have a device or phone number. link to the account where you get a code where you then confirm the login. So this is Joe Kissel's territory, but it's it's in the book too. And Joe and I consulted about this part of the book in particular. Is change your password if you've been using it for a while. Use unique passwords at every site. Get 1Password or LastPass or something, and create unique, strong passwords for every site, and use autofill it with those programs. So that's priority. And secondarily, if you can put in two-factor authentication, which increasingly camera operators, manufacturers should have offered this all along, because it is our most precious personal data they're recording. So some have started to offer it like Ring. So turn that on wherever possible as well. That's a great start. The other is there's an option. Have you talked to anybody about Apple's HomeKit Secure Video yet?
No, we have not.
It's kind of new. Apple announced it at WWDC and then took a while to roll it out. And what it is, it's a technology, it's a developer technology that camera manufacturers can enable in their cameras. And it is slowly starting to appear. And the Logitech I own, the Circle 2, it can be updated to use this other firmware, basically, that Logitech has developed that ties directly in. So you know how iCloud Keychain, it's never stored encrypted in iCloud. iCloud Keychain is only stored encrypted in all of your devices, and the encryption keys live in your devices, and they're locked through biometric or passphrases and so forth. So Apple has no ability to access your passwords stored in iCloud Keychain. And when you add devices or remove them, you're adding them to this secure set, and they exchange keys in a secure fashion. It's very clever. So HomeKit Secure Video is that, but for video. So you have to have a hub in your network. You have to have an Apple TV, 3rd generation or later, or an iPad running whichever version. So one of those two things as you normally need for remote access for HomeKit or for automation with HomeKit. So that's the low. It's a fairly low bar to make work. Then you can upgrade your cameras from other manufacturers. Apple is not making cameras, as we know, hasn't for many years. We don't have a quick take security camera available. But so Logitech, I think Linksys just updated some of their cameras. There are several other companies who have signed on to this. When you enable that, your cameras now they basically use the hub to encrypt video locally. You can still view it on your network or with a device, an iPad or an iPhone. That's part of the iCloud set. The video is then stored in entirely encrypted form in iCloud. Apple doesn't charge for additional video. You have to have a paid iCloud plan of 200 gigabytes for one camera and 2 terabytes for up to 5 cameras. There's no additional cost. And they let you store, I've forgotten the exact parameters. It's some number of days. It's I think 30 days, I forget. There's some number of days of video of motion triggered clips that get stored. And so this to me is this very interesting emerging option, because you could already own a device. Like I already own this Logitech, it's 2 years old. I can flash it with new firmware provided and supported by Logitech. And suddenly my video is stored in the cloud in a fashion that Logitech, the government, hackers, whomever, cannot gain access to. And I can't recommend it directly yet because I haven't tried it. And the Logitech software is still in beta. But I think it's a great upping of the bar, as Apple often does with privacy and security. And I think we'll see other companies are going to have to come into this space. So, if you're highly concerned, you could immediately do that if you have a camera that supports it, or you could buy a camera that supports it or is said it will, and that gives you another tool besides local video storage if you want the advantages of storing in the cloud.
So I will insert another question before we get to the obvious questions, because that brings up a really interesting part. Some of these services, some cameras and services give you so much free cloud time to record in the clouds, and some of them you can buy. You've talked about the local recording, which, I think that's kind of obvious. It's local, so whatever security measures you've taken to protect your photos and all your other documents are going to apply to your video. How do you feel about the cloud stored video from the various providers? Good, bad, a little shaky, not sure?
I think it's a mystery. There's a chapter at the end of the book in which I look at 11 different camera systems. Like we just dig into them with all the specs. Like here's what you get, and here's how storage works, and here's what the cameras cost, and here's the monthly fees. So I had to dig into the security and privacy specs. And I find it a little lacking. Like most of the companies don't really tell you how they're securing video. So it's sort of like, we're encrypting it at rest. We're the only ones who have the keys. If you're lucky, they tell you that. So it's all fine. And that's kind of it. And I don't blame them because, the contrast is something like Slack. So Slack, they have a very detailed guide of the way they secure data for you. And you can go there and read page after page, and it doesn't compromise their security for them to tell you how they do it, but they explain specifically how the means they take to ensure that nobody else has access to your stored messages. And they have to, because they're essentially storage service like home video camera cloud storage in this situation. And I do wish the companies were more forthcoming, because I feel like very few of them provide enough data that would let you make an informed decision about whether they're making a good choice or not. And there's like this fundamental problem is, so there's two aspects of secure, sort of storage and transmittal is, are they running an encrypted stream from the camera to their servers? And nearly all of them either are, most of them say they are, all of them should be explaining they are, but they're using HTTPS or something very similar. So someone shouldn't be able to intercept anything from the camera, even on your network, until it reaches their servers. But when it reaches there, it's decrypted because it's just a secure connection. Then the video is typically, some services, but not all, re-encrypt it for storage at rest using keys that the company owns that you don't possess, and that you have to rely they've built everything correctly. So there's a stage at which the video is decrypted, and if someone cracks their servers, could intercept that video at that point. Or they might not have good enough security, and someone could derive or steal their encryption keys, or suborn an employee, which has happened, unfortunately, and not at video camera services, but at some internet services, have had employees who are subversive, working for other countries other than the one in which they are currently residing. Let's say there's a whole story about Twitter in Saudi Arabia recently, allegations there. So there's a lot of points of problems. So fundamentally, I actually make the case in the book, and I think it's true, is you're trusting that these companies are doing the proper thing, and only some of the companies even tell you what they're doing. So this is why I'm kind of hip on HomeKit Secure Video, and I hope it'll be the way of the future, is you don't have to trust that Apple is making the right choices on the server. You have to believe that they're technically competent enough to make the right choices on devices, and we believe they are, because none of the systems that work like iCloud Keychain or HomeKit Secure Video have been breached, and it's been many years that they've run systems like that. So, it's more like, do you trust text messaging or do you trust iMessage? Like, I trust iMessage much more. A text message isn't even encrypted. Or do I trust WhatsApp, excuse me, in the form that's not at the highest security level? Do I trust WhatsApp more than iMessage? I think I trust iMessage more. So that's part of the evaluation. So if someone said to me, so Chuck, if you said to me, should I use a proprietary cloud service run by a home security camera company to store my video? I'd be like, well, you can, but I think you have to judge whether you're willing to give them that much trust. Maybe you are. I think I am. I'm using Logitech. I have to be honest. I have Logitech. It's being stored in Logitech servers, and but I am thinking about HomeKit Secure Video switching over for just this reason.
Well, and you also, it's the same discussion you have when you're talking about smart speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Am I doing anything? Is there anything going on in my home or wherever the smart speaker happens to be that I would be embarrassed or not want to be public?
Right.
And, you have to really stop and think about that. Because obviously there's nothing criminal going on in my home, but am I really comfortable with somebody having access to everything that's said, every phone conversation, every, theoretically listening in on this conversation, every TV show I watch, because, it's capturing so anything that's going on audio wise, they're capturing. And video is it feels more intrusive.
Yes.
Frankly, but I'm not sure it is. I think the audio is almost more intrusive.
Right, because you could feed the audio. If you had an audio grab from somebody's house 24 hours a day, and you fed it into a pretty good modern AI-based transcription thing, what would you extract? How many times are you reading credit card numbers out over the phone? This is the thing, when it came out, it turned out that all the smart speaker companies, including Apple, were having human beings listen to conversations without disclosure in different ways. And there's a lot of nuance in there, I realize. one of the things that was discovered is how many times people are, having sex in another room, and it's captured by accident, or reading out their credit card numbers, or maybe engaged. I mean, they could be engaged in crime. So I'm not saying crimes should not be discovered. This gets into a very iffy moral discussion there, but you should be protected by government investigating crime in your house without a warrant. And suddenly, if someone comes across an instance of a crime, anyway, I mean, it just becomes that is a morally dubious ground. I'm not defending the right to the privacy of your home, not defending the right to commit crimes. But it could be, depending on the country, and the crime could be, I had an unmarried male non-relative come to my house and I'm a woman, and we could be put into jail for 3 years each. So that's, there's that crime, or there's the crime of coming home and saying, I just did 70 in a 60-mile-an-hour zone. These are both crimes, right, in the country that you happen to be in. Right. Anyway, but I think it is. Audio is terrifying, but video processing, especially for systems like these that do motion-triggered clips, if all you're storing is motion-triggered video, you've given someone a highlight reel of everything important that's happening in your life, inside or outside. So that's a little terrifying. And that's why I do it, but our camera points outside, but it's recording audio from inside because we have it in the window. So if anything happened outside and we were saying something sensitive inside, then that would be exposed.
Right. And, political discussions in the current environment, all those could be captured, and not necessarily mined to do you harm, but mined to direct things at you, to sell you things, or to convince you that you should vote for the political party you're advocating, or not vote for the one you're criticizing, or, flip it around. Maybe they want to try to convince you to vote for the other one. I'm
going to get off this call, and Google is going to advertise like traffic cameras for me. Hey, you need a traffic alert speed detecting thing. Yeah. I should also point out there's one other difference I didn't think about. I should probably modify the book now that I say this, which is there's a difference between, I talk about this a bit, but there's a difference between a camera you get that points entirely at a public space that everyone else can see, and a camera you get that doesn't. So our front-facing camera is in the front window, and it points out at a scene that anyone can see from the street. So at some level, there's still privacy issues, of course, and there's still all this stuff to do with that. But it is not revealing anything that someone, like if the city decided to put a camera up on our corner, we would fight it. It would be terrible, be a violation of civil liberties. But let's say they stuck one on the corner that only pointed at public areas, at publicly visible areas, which people had no reasonable expectation of privacy. That's what we're capturing. So the audio inside is actually more troubling, but the camera only gets triggered from outside events. But it's still a funny point.
Well, and I've made no bones about it. I've talked about this plenty of times on MacVoices that I have a Ring doorbell. Mm-hmm. Now the Ring doorbell is only pointing out, so and it's wonderful for times that I'm not home, but mm-hmm. I prefer to have somebody think I might be at home. Yes. But on the other hand, it's pointing toward my neighbor's home, and so I didn't consult with them when I put it in, and it only recently came to my attention that, am I violating their privacy? Now, I don't think they're doing anything nefarious either, but you never know. So
I actually have a chunk of the book devoted to that exact question. Actually, what was very funny is I was nearly finished writing the book, and I was talking about it with my 12-year-old, my wife, and they said, so is video from a camera like this admissible in court? And I said, I don't know. And they said, is it in your book? I said, no, it isn't. So I went back and wrote that part, researched and wrote that part of the book. And my wife said, isn't that kind of the main point of it? I'm like, well, sort of. It's not always, but it is. And that's a different issue. The admissibility is actually a little complicated. It sounds like generally yes, but the police have to typically go through a procedure. You can't just, if you email video to the police somehow, it may actually not be admissible in court and there's issues like, is the timestamp on the camera right? All that. So the general answer is often video is admissible in court, but if it's video taken of people whose privacy is being violated, even if they're committing a crime, that video may be inadmissible, as I was saying earlier. So if you don't tell somebody there's a camera in your home and you invite them into your home and they do something illegal in your home, like they steal money, it may not be possible that video, it may not be admissible because they had a reasonable expectation of privacy in public areas in your home that you'd invited them into. If they break in, more of a different thing, right? But the issue of privacy of other people, it winds up being very similar to the criminal test. Is if you have a camera that points out, I have a great case, which is across the street, there's a house, there's a bunch of windows on the front, lovely people and their children, lovely people live there. Their children are also lovely. There's adults, parents, and two small kids, and they're adorable. And our camera points that direction. It's far enough away and low enough resolution. I'm not capturing everything going on, but ostensibly it's a little like Rear Window. I'm capturing everything that you could see in any of their windows that are facing the public. Anyone standing in the street could also. So do they have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their home from something that someone standing in the seat could look up and see? And the answer is probably no. But if I had a camera in my upper eave in the back of the house pointing with a zoom into my neighbor's window, it could be illegal, very likely illegal when I'm capturing. And it is something your neighbor would be very upset to find out for. So I do have a section that's like, how do you consider the privacy of other people, including the legality? And that gets into the Airbnb thing too, is if you're an Airbnb host, where can you legally put cameras? And I should say, I'm not a lawyer, but I've included links and things. Airbnb now has, they had policies before, but since some well-publicized incidents the last couple of years, you have to, if you have cameras inside your home and you're a host, whether you're renting a room or the entire house, when someone checks out before they commit the reservation, you have to have a map that pops up. I mean, you fill out a map on Airbnb and it pops up and it shows you exactly where all the cameras are. And they can't be pointing into bedrooms or bathrooms and so forth, anywhere that people have an expectation of privacy, but in common areas it can be okay. So these are, day-to-day issues. There's millions and millions of people staying at Airbnbs every year, or maybe every month now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something that I would not have even thought about that would be included in a book like this. But yeah, and of course the cameras now, some of the consumer cameras are of a reasonable size, but you can get, much, much smaller, much more obscure cameras that even the larger ones people a lot of times don't notice, but the little ones you absolutely may not be aware.
Well, there's the ones that come hidden in alarm clocks and other kinds that, they look like they're a real appliance. There was one of the Airbnb stories is someone looked over and was like, is that a USB? This is literally the case. They said, is that a USB charger or is that a camera that looks like a USB charger? And it was a camera and a USB charger. And that provoked that was a whole stink. But you can also, the other thing is you can get 4K cameras now. So you could have a camera that's in the corner of a room and it's going to capture stuff that's absolutely crisp. That's, dramatically further away than it would be if you had, say, a 720p camera. And that's the same thing even outside. If you're pointing across the street, like my camera, I've got a set to 1080p and we're, 40, 50 feet away from the neighbor across the street. So the resolution, you're getting down to relatively small pixels and motion and the field of, depth of field and all that. But if I had a 4K camera, I could probably make out the facial features of anybody in their house. And then it's like, well, am I doing facial recognition? Does the video I capture become something that gets subpoenaed and is used to, all that kind of stuff? Yeah. So I think it's worth thinking about. It's worth thinking about, especially when you're figuring out that you want cameras, where to place them so that you're not violating other people's privacy unintentionally. But I also have a section on the surveillance state where you have to make sure, you have to think about whether you're aiding like kind of a, what do you call it? The panopticon, the old from the late 1800s, right? It's like the panopticon of today. Like, are we adding to it by having cameras where the video could be subpoenaed? If everyone has a camera, does the police state, an incipient police state need cameras? They can just take our video.
Zapier, the easiest way to automate your business tasks, is sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. When you're running your own business, your to-do list is never ending. You know you could automate many of the tasks you do, but you don't know how. That's where Zapier comes in. Zapier connects and moves information between your web apps so you don't have to. Just pick your apps from the list of over 1,500 apps that Zapier works with. Just a few clicks and Zapier will take information from Gmail and move it to your CRM, or to a spreadsheet, or to wherever you want it to go. And not just any information or all the information, but the information you decide you want to capture. No code, no programming, just a few minutes of clicks and your first Zap is on the job. The more I look at Zapier, the more things I find I can automate to make my life easier. And who deserves an easier life than you? More than 4.5 million people are saving an average of 40 hours per month by using Zapier. I sure can use that 40 hours, and I bet you can too. So go to our special link at zapier.com/MacVoices through the end of the month to get a 14-day free trial. That's zapier.com/MacVoices for 14 days of simple, powerful business automation. Zapier.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Zapier for their support of MacVoices.
All right, so I've been giving a big buildup. So the obvious questions are there brands or cameras that you recommend that people buy if they want to do this, or are there brands that you recommend they absolutely stay away from as of what? We're at the end of February 2020, because those can change with policy changes and software changes. But right now, where do you stand on what to buy and not to buy?
I have to scan through my book to remind myself of a couple things, because there's so I think I would say I own a Logitech, and it actually, I have positive enough feelings about it that it's what prompted me in part to write this book. So I have to say, I think they make a lot of good choices. The cameras are not particularly cheap, but they're not particularly expensive, and the option to do HomeKit Secure Video for me as a Mac, an iPhone, iPad user, that's a great advantage if and when I choose to switch over to it, which I probably will. Kind of waiting to make sure there's no bugs or things I have to worry about or Apple makes sudden changes. So I wouldn't say Logitech's the top of my list, because it's actually quite expensive relative to some of the cheaper cameras. So you can spend a lot less money for similar capabilities. Like the one I have does 720p or 1080p. It's an indoor-outdoor model, I think, or all their. Yeah, they have a wired. They have a wired version that requires both models they have are Wi-Fi, and they're both rated for indoor and outdoor. But you can get one that's needs a battery connection, and you can get one that needs an AC plug, you need power to it, and one that's battery powered. And that's basically it. So it's very simple. They have a reasonably priced cloud plan for storage. Their apps are pretty good. So I like it. In the book, I actually don't recommend one system in particular, because I feel like there's so many trade-offs. So for me and my family, what we need, we like it. We're paying about $100 a year for cloud service, which is not that much by current standards, but Google is about to drop. It's rolling out its new Nest pricing, which is going to be substantially cheaper than it was in the past, especially for multiple cameras in a single house. So I'm wondering if the prices will drop. And if we switch from our Logitech cloud service to Apple, to HomeKit, our price goes down to $0, because we already have a family plan 2 terabyte iCloud storage option in place. So it's kind of a weird choice. You could buy a Logitech camera. You might spend a little more for the camera. Works in a lot of different places. I think the hardware is really good. I like their software. And you could pay nothing for storage if you already have iCloud storage. Just switch over to HomeKit Secure Video. So that's the one I think I have the most unallied support for. A lot of people do like a D-Link. I actually am not a big fan of D-Link's models. I think they need to step up on security and privacy issues. They don't disclose enough information about what they're doing. Their cameras are relatively affordable, is the thing, and they have fairly cheap cloud service options. So you've got Google Nest and Amazon Ring and Amazon Blink, all from those 2 companies, and I feel like it's hard to talk about any of those 3 options because people have such strong feelings about Amazon and Google. So it's less a pricing issue. The Nest cameras are very expensive. I think they are now overpriced compared to the rest of the market. So I wouldn't recommend them on price, but they do have some interesting options. If you want like floodlights and siren, Nest have some of the best options for that. So the camera detects motion and it hits a certain trigger. It's like, woo, woo, that if that's what you want, they may be the best choice. Arlo is actually a really good from a Netgear. There are so many offerings in the Arlo lineup. It's actually a little maddening because there's not a great comparison, but I haven't tested Arlo cameras. They get great reviews, and I feel like they made a lot of really good choices about the kinds of options you can get. So I think Logitech and Netgear Arlo, or Logitech Circle and Netgear Arlo. Circle's easy. There's like basically 1 model and 2 variants. Arlo is complicated. There's like 9 models and they all do slightly different things. They even have a cellular only version of Arlo. So you can put it up with a battery someplace and it connects over the cellular network. You don't need a Wi-Fi network to capture video, maybe at a rental property or some other place where there's no Wi-Fi. The other thing I'd call out is the Wyze, W-Y-Z-E. Joe Kissel has some of those. They get very good reviews. They're absurdly cheap. What is the price? It's $20 for the static camera, and they have one that will spin around 360 on its axis, and that's $30. So absurdly cheap, right? But they've had some security issues lately, and there are a couple different things that happened last year. And I would want to wait and see that they have solved all those. They had a big database breach. 2.4 million customers' information worldwide was, the email addresses, list of cameras in their homes, a lot of stuff was leaked. So I kind of feel like I have to recover from that before I would be comfortable recommending them. But they are very inexpensive for what they offer, and they've got a good online plan. The other one I would mention, so I guess as I run through that, I'm like, I think Logitech and Arlo from Netgear are my top picks for variety and choice and cost. Amazon's Blink is a very weird option. It's a battery-powered camera, 2 years worth of service, and free storage for clips of up to 2 hours indefinitely until you delete them or they age out from new videos recorded. So Blink is another option that's a little bit weird in there. I don't think it's hard to recommend it directly because it's such a very specific thing. It has to meet your exact need of wanting to only have short clips and store them for a certain period of time. So you can see why I had a hard time providing recommendations. I will mention one other thing, though, which is Lorex, L-O-R-E-X, is the company that I feel is one I would recommend for multi-camera systems with local video storage on a network video recorder, or NVR. They're very inexpensive. They're sold in the big box stores like Best Buy. They're sold online. They sell directly. And they seem to have done everything right. And if you want to get a bunch of cameras and you want to pay a very small amount of money and you want local video storage, they seem like a great option. So there's other companies that make those systems, but I feel like they seem to have the highest quality version. And I looked up some of the numbers on them, and if you wanted to get, here's, for example, if you wanted outdoor cameras, 4 outdoor cameras that are 1080p, that are rated from negative 30 degrees Celsius up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a pretty huge range.
Wow.
And you could add 4 more cameras to the system, and it comes with a 1 terabyte drive for recording. That's $270. So 4 cameras, capability to add 4 more, and the storage and the central network hub. It's super cheap. So if for some people you have to run wires back is the big thing. They're all I think this is a, I'm trying to remember if those are analog cameras. They're high quality analog cameras, but you have to run BNC like coax cable to each camera, which is a problem. It carries power and video, and the digitization happens in the central box. That's why it's so cheap. There's like one central system. But for some people, $270 for 4 cameras in 1080p and local storage is kind of like, well, that's the answer. That's what I want. No one else looks at my video. It's very inexpensive. I'll run some wires through the attic and it's golden, right? So that's I always have a long answer for you, but it's because I don't know if I have a great, I don't have a top pick or top 3 picks in this category.
Well, and you just ran through a lot of, during the whole discussion, you've run through a lot of different things a lot of different considerations of every kind.
Yeah, I hate making decisions for people on this because it's so personal, I think.
Well, yeah, and I guess, the good news is, and the bad news is that there is no obvious pick here. Mm-hmm. That you really have to examine your use cases and your feelings about the potential use cases for your video, should it be shared or compromised, mm-hmm. or whatever.
Or you may be someplace, if you really want to share your video with police, you're in a high crime area and you feel like it's a civic duty and it's really important to you, then you may want to get a Ring, because Amazon Ring is optimized to share with police. They make it easy to do, and it's it's legal and so forth. Now, some people find that to be the exact reason why they don't want an Amazon Ring, because they don't want a video service to be working that closely with law enforcement, not because they distrust law enforcement necessarily. Some people do, but that's not necessarily the reason. It's they want to make sure there's a more than arm's length. They want a football field length between those two parts. But that is, I will say, that's a selling point. And I've discussed those two trade-offs. Like, here's the advantage, you can give it to police. Here's the disadvantage, you can give it to police really easily. So yeah, I feel like the whole book is a bunch of trade-offs about those kinds of things.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because it seems like anytime that I've heard the Ring discussion, mm-hmm. and their cooperation with law enforcement, it's always being touted as a negative. And I think again, it's in the eye of the beholder. There may be good reasons that I would listen. If somebody breaks in my front door and I've got video, I want to share that with the police because I want to get the guy or girl. Right. Let's not be sexist here.
That's right. Women can be excellent burglars. It's true.
Absolutely. But on the other hand, there are other reasons I might not want to share it with the police. So, all things you just have to think about before putting these in, buying them, putting them in, and using them.
There's parts of Seattle. I mean, Seattle, like I say, is a generally low crime city, especially relative to a lot of big cities. But I would say there are definitely parts of my city where someone would be delighted to be able to click a box and share stuff with police on a regular basis because there's so much crime in there. It might be their block. It might be that the heroin market is set up a block away. And this is a sad part of modern life. Their house is being broken into every other day. There's people leaving garbage on the lawn or syringes. There's things that they need for their quality of life. And I respect that as long as it's not, discriminatory and biased, as long as they're not accused. Like if you have video evidence that shows the thing, you're not accusing people. It's the problem in our city and many is that people make blanket accusations about who is involved in something. And I think that is different and that's the next door situation also. But having actual video, you can say, look, these groups of people for the last 2 weeks, they've been coming in and dumping trash on my lawn, or they've been shooting up my lawn or selling heroin on my lawn. And I want to do something about it. That's a positive social action to probably not have heroin dealt on your lawn or being dealt at all. But again, there's civil libertarians who fear any erosion between corporate and government, even when you have the permission to choose how it's used. And what's great is you don't have to choose that. So you can choose it affirmatively if that's something you want. You can choose to not do it and be a Ring customer, or you can choose to not be a Ring customer. You could be a Ring customer and choose to never share your video with police in any form, or you could choose to not be a Ring customer. And I think that's what's great is that there are so many different options and choices depending on what your stance or interest is, which could be entirely neutral too. You may have no opinion about it.
This MacVoices is sponsored by Linode, your solution for when you need a virtual server in the cloud. Need a virtual cloud server like now? Linode has you covered. You can deploy a new server customized to your purpose with the features you want in seconds. Time is money, and if you have that immediate need, Linode is there. And even if you don't need your new server that quickly, Linode is there. And these aren't just any servers. These are SSD-based 40 gigabit network, high-performance processor-powered servers that are capable of web hosting, distributed applications, hosted servers, and more. Pick from a simple $5 per month Linode plan or ramp the whole way up to a high-powered dedicated CPU. When you need to upgrade as your requirements demand, that upgrade is a click away. To make some deployments even easier, there's a host of one-click installs available, from Minecraft to WordPress. Need to locate your server in a particular location for either performance or legal reasons? No problem. Linode has servers all over the world. Perhaps most important, though, is their pricing. No surprises, no hidden costs. You pay for what you need, and you pay for what you use on an hourly basis. No data transfer fees like some of the larger cloud services. It's your data. Why would you expect to pay to access it? With Linode, you don't. These are just a few of the features that Linode brings to the table. I want you to visit linode.com/MacVoices right now and see what all the fuss is about. Again, linode.com/MacVoices takes $20 off your first server package. You've been thinking about that virtual server of your own for a long time. Make it happen today with Linode. Thanks to Linode for their support of MacVoices.
Yeah, and somewhere in there, I think there's an empowerment discussion that, not only do I want to, but now I have the power to affect change at my discretion, though.
I will tell you a funny. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, that's the it's not the city, town, state, whatever, putting up the camera and pointing it at my lawn. It's me pointing a camera at my lawn and deciding what I do with that video, and that's the empowerment part.
I will tell you a very funny thing though, which is often not stated with cameras, and I think it should be. It's very funny and kind of awful at the same time. I do mention it in passing in the book. Is one of the I would bet one of the top purposes besides burglary and crime. This is a kind of crime that people get a camera for, is people letting their dogs poop on their lawn. Because you hear about this all the time. I mentioned this to someone, and they said, oh yeah, we had a neighbor who she particular had her dog poop on our lawn and not clean it up. And we knew she was doing it. So we took care of it by sitting on the porch one day. When she went by with her dog, she saw us there. We rather loudly made some comments about, what we might do. And then she never did it again. And I thought, they're to each other as if she were not there. And I thought, oh my gosh, but I was thinking, there's crime, and this, maybe it's a crime to have your dog leave its residue on your lawn without cleaning it up. It probably is in some jurisdictions, but there's also like, what's the word? It's like antisocial behavior. And that can often fall in the gap. You're not going to call the police. You're going to call the police. They're going to be like, it's a neighbor dispute, call us if they do something worse, which can be terrible too. So there's in that middle space, there is I want to know who is doing this, who is dumping their grass clippings in my yard, who's pooping on my lawn, whatever. And that does come up, unfortunately, often as a reason when you search forums and what people like about cameras.
Yeah. The book is $14.99 at takecontrolbooks.com, of course. And Joe, I know, was on a little while ago talking about, that they always have some bundles going on. Mm-hmm. There may be some bundles with this book, but I think anybody that either has a camera or is contemplating a camera should really get this, because I knew, given that you were writing it, that it's not just going to be, okay, here's how you plug it in and, 4K versus 1080p versus 720p. There were going to be a lot more depth to it. And you brought up some things that I admit I hadn't thought about. And now I got to go and consider.
Oh, no. It's funny when you get into this and you're thinking, well, my wife and I love The Good Place. And we're actually rewatching it with our 12-year-old, who has also watched the whole thing separately. They binged it after we were watching it. And, it is funny. I think watching that show perks up a lot of moral quandaries. I keep thinking about the ethics of certain things, and a camera winds up being this, it's like an ethical nightmare or a privacy nightmare. And you have to, because of the criminal aspect and the privacy aspect, you have to think about, what am I doing? Am I recording people without their permission? Am I violating the law? Am I aiding society? And, it's just a piece of hardware, but I'm glad to have the opportunity to think about it. And I'm always glad when people want to talk about these issues beyond the, what resolution is it? Yeah. Although, you should definitely get 1080p, by the way.
Yeah.
or higher.
Well, and I hope we've given some of the folks out there that are interested in the cameras, whether they have them or not yet, some different things to think about. Because you're right. Some of them are legality, but, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Mm-hmm. Or maybe just because you can doesn't mean you shouldn't. So, your mileage may vary.
It's a funny thing. We each can own our own panopticon now, and now you have to make the choices about what that is, the private panopticon.
Yeah, I like that. There should be a brand. Start building cameras, Glenn, and use that as a brand name. I like it.
We were watching a Good Place episode the other day, and in the background on a chalkboard, there was something about, I forget what it was, but it said "Bend it like Bentham," which was a reference to the 19th century writer who wrote the book. I think it was Utopia, about utopianism, but I can't remember. I don't think he's the person who came with the panopticon. Maybe it was him. And I just had a laugh because I was like, this ridiculous TV show is making me think about these moral issues like the panopticon. Like, all right, that's fair. Trolley problem, all these things.
So you are very active with Take Control Books. You've written a number. You're constantly updating them. This is a brand new one, but you also do so many other things. And give us a quick rundown of what they are right now, because I know they change constantly.
Well, I'm still doing the Mac World. I'm writing the Mac 911 column, the increasingly inaccurately named Mac 911 column, where a lot of issues are iOS and iPad OS. But that's a lot of fun. I get to read what is causing people pain and confusion every week, and sometimes alleviate it. So that's always fun. Over at macworld.com, you can read columns or write me in with questions. I get some real stumpers, because after this many years, the things that come up become more and more obscure, and I have to do more and more research to go, maybe there is no answer for that. Why are you having that problem? This project I've been doing, I think I talked to you about it, was it a year ago, about the Tiny Type Museum and Time Capsule? I think we're about to ship. It's a small case. I call it a museum, and it's a small case that contains genuine artifacts from type and printing history, like molds used to make type and pieces of pieces of phototype that used to be used in the day to expose before digital type, to expose film to typeset. And there's a book I wrote that's been letterpress printed, and it's a set that's supposed to preserve and teach about type history as these things just disappear. We're already excuse me, we're 50 years past letterpress, and there's still vestiges of it and kind of a revival in craft letterpress. But a lot of the things that were used to create type, to create this industry, the last pieces of those are going away. So I've collected a bunch of them, and I'm splitting them up among these sets. So it's the time capsule concept is that there'll be 100 or so of these out there in the world, and each of them will help preserve this past for the future when all these components are totally gone. There was just a heartbreaking breakup of a museum in a privately run museum in Melbourne, Australia. This guy, this guy was apparently a little persnickety, but he'd collected a massive amount of material over years and just ran out of money. And there was a public auction, and the stuff was sold off and split up. And it's unknown, some of it is invaluable, irreplaceable historical stuff. Some of it is active, whatever. And it's just kind of gone and split up. And this has happened again and again. So this is my effort to fight entropy a little bit and to document things a little bit. And we sold about 80 of the set of 100 that we're making. And we're about, this next month, we are going to be shipping all the pre-order, or just about all the pre-ordered museum cases. And that's exciting. Oh, and it's tinytypemuseum.com if you're interested in the project and photos and so forth. But that's been it was really neat. I started the Kickstarter for that a year ago. Was very successful. And have continued to sell museums and books since then, and got to spend most of last year doing research and writing, and alongside all this other stuff I'm doing. I have 5 active Take Control books and the Macworld thing, and writing for Fast Company and Increment, and I just got off a 7-week stint, not a stink. It was delightful. 7-week stint of a election podcast, a daily election podcast. And with all that's going on, it's been great to kind of dig into the past and understand the antecedents of the present. And I think you brought up, even before we started recording, I have a new podcast called the Tiny Typecast that is going to be interviews with people I've met and things I've learned along the way on creating this tiny museum. Starting with just posted an episode from Letterform Archive in San Francisco, which is this unprecedented, unrivaled collection open to the public of graphic design history, of old specimen books and corporate design manuals and originals by Paul Rand, the guy who did the IBM logo and Westinghouse logo and other logos. It's an incredible place. And so I was down there last June and interviewed the folks, and I'll be posting interviews like that for those interested in that slightly arcane, but I would suspect many of your listeners have an oar in the past, maybe the present, in graphic design or web design. So they may find this, they may have worked in hot metal at one point. I would not be shocked. I keep meeting people who are my age, who are just at the end of that, or they just love this stuff. I keep meeting people who are all digital in their life, and they love finding out about the analog antecedents. And so this has been a hoot doing that too.
I agree with you. I mean, and we got to find a way to get you back on more often, because there's so many things, interesting things that you're doing and into that I think people should hear more about. And I know you've got your own projects to share them, but I'd like to, bring them to this audience too, because I just saw something the other day, and I didn't know this. I've known, you feel like forever that, okay, the large letters are uppercase and the small letters are lowercase. And I just learned what that means, that in I guess the printer's box or wherever they were stored, the upper cases were in the upper part of the case and the lower cases were in the bottom part of the case. It's funny because I've learned to typeset in the 1980s on phototype equipment past the metal days. And so, but it's the kind of thing that like you float in that medium. And I saw someone posted, I think on Twitter, something about it, and it got 50,000 retweets, and everyone's like, what? I was like, oh, of course, civilians don't know. There's only those of us who have been in the monastery know that it's right. And it's even things like capital is majuscule and minuscule are the words that get used in academic, literally in bibliography, in the study of books. They use those terms to differentiate them as well. But yeah, one of the things that's included in each museum is I made a little reproduction. It's kind of like it's a laser cut engraved piece that is a replica of the layout of, so there was the uppercase and lowercase was traditional probably from not long after Gutenberg, maybe decades after Gutenberg is how that started.
But in the 1800s, they started, typesetters would organize into a single case everything, and it was called the California job case. And it was because you had to pack up to go to California. You didn't have time for upper and lower cases, so they'd stick it all in one case. And it's true, it's the origin. It was a bigger case, it was wider. And so I have a little replica of the layout of the California case where all the letters are. And letter frequency, there's a giant compartment for E, and there's a really tiny one for K, right? Because you're going to have a lot of E's and not very many K's or Z's or Q's. And I walk into a friend's house, a parent of one of my kids' friends, the other day, and I look up on the wall. I'm like, oh, you've got a type case on the wall. They're like, is that what that is? I'm like, yeah, that's a 3/4 case. That was probably from this era. It was probably made at the Hamilton Company in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. And, it's a hoot. It's you live and breathe and you walk around, and like I interact with the world in a different way because of my type background. Can I tell you one other anecdote?
Please.
This is just so you know the kind of household my children grow up in. There's a typeface called Albertus, which is pretty famous. I don't know if you know that one. It's one that many people often know. Do you remember the Prisoner TV series?
Sure.
That's the typeface used throughout. Patrick McGoohan.
Patrick McGoohan, yeah.
Yeah. So the typeface used throughout The Prisoner is Albertus. It was designed in the 1930s by a German emigre to England named Bertold Volpe. And a couple years ago, I became friends with his youngest son. He had children late in life. He passed away in 1989. It's a great typeface. He designed very few in his life. I wound up doing a digital rendition of Albertus when I was in college as my senior project. So it's in my head. Wherever it's at, I always see it, right? And then there was a big exhibition of Volpe's work a few years ago in England. I went to see the exhibition and met his son and met a number of people who knew him. It was very interesting. So my kids and I were watching an old episode of the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes. And at the end of the episode, these are shot in the 80s, I think, or something, Watson flips up a paper in front of the camera. And I freeze the video and I say, kids, that's Albertus. They're like, oh, Dad, because they know they can practically recognize it. And I'm like, look, it's on the newspaper, but no newspaper would have used Albertus in that era, and it wasn't designed at the time the story was written. And they're like, oh, Dad, so that's what it's like to live with me, Chuck.
There are worse things, I'm sure, Glenn, but you got to come back and talk more about this and about some of the other stuff, because it really is.
Sure, I'd love to.
It's interesting. Yeah,
I'd love to. I'll always love talking to you. I want to make sure I have interesting things to say. So if I'll be happy to come back.
And anytime you show up, you have interesting things to say.
Very kind. Very kind.
So, folks, the book is Take Control of Home Security Cameras by Mr. Glenn Fleishman at takecontrolbooks.com. Go and check it out because, again, I've learned and have a lot to think about with the cameras I already own and how I'm using them. I think you'll have the same thing. Glenn, come back and see us.
I will. Thank you so much.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. We'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.